there was an officer-involved shooting very, very early on a Sunday morning. And I went to the department and I had a conversation with the officer that was involved in the shooting. And then at a later time, we scheduled a critical incident stress debriefing for the other personnel that were on the scene. There was one individual in that group that I was particularly concerned about, and I wasn't sure why. I wasn't sure with what I was seeing, whether it was as a result of just this particular incident, whether it was memories of previous incidents that were coming up, something going on in his personal life, what it was.
Welcome to the Hey Chaplain podcast. My name is Jared Altick, and I'm a chaplain with the police department. As a patrol chaplain, my goal is to help police officers make it to retirement and beyond as healthy as they can possibly be. This podcast has the same goal. So on Hey Chaplain, you'll hear from dispatchers and federal agents, sheriffs and U.S. Marshals, as well as the occasional patrol officer from my hometown of Kansas City. From the LAPD to Scotland Yard, the guests on Hey Chaplain share their own wisdom so the police officers everywhere can survive and thrive. Today we're talking about what happens after a critical incident. What happens when an officer's normal coping mechanisms aren't helping anymore, and what does the department need to do to give that officer the support that he or she needs? I'm honored to have David Edwards as my guest today. He's one of the best trainers in the country when it comes to this stuff, and among the many hats that he wears, he's a chaplain, an educator, a cop, and a post-critical incident support team member. David has a lot of expertise and a lot of firsthand stories that he's willing to share. But don't miss what he says about peer support, training for stress management in the academy, and the purpose of critical incident response to give the officer hope that the future can be better. Warning, this episode contains limited descriptions of suicide and violent accidental death. Listener discretion is advised. Here's David Edwards. Hello, David. How are you today?
I am absolutely great, Jared. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well, and I'm real excited to talk to you. I know that you do a lot of training and you teach a lot in law enforcement about some pretty serious matters. And I guess I want to start with maybe giving me a good definition for what a critical incident is and what it's not. Like, where's that line?
Let me give you what I think is the official definition of a critical incident, because I teach for the International Critical Incident Stress Foundation, and they have a definition for it, which is any event that has the potential to cause significant human distress and to overwhelm a person's normal coping mechanisms. So I think that's a good place to start in understanding what a critical incident is. And I think, of course, in emergency services, we have in our mind some of the events that we would sort of automatically classify as a critical incident, like a line of duty death or the suicide of a colleague or
shootings,
some kind of
that kind of thing.
Officer involved shootings, significant events involving children, events that have a tremendous media interest associated with them. Those are the kind of things that we typically would classify as a critical incident, although I think it's important to keep the definition in mind that it's any incident, that for any individual, it doesn't have to be a group that's involved in something together. It can be any individual that is experiencing significant distress, and whatever they normally do to cope isn't working. For that person. That's a critical incident.
Okay. Is it absolutely defined by the person experiencing it, or is there a point at which you'd say, well, this doesn't entirely count?
Well, I think the individual is really, quote unquote, the boss when it comes to understanding the impact of any particular incident. One of the important things to do in the aftermath of any kind of traumatic event, stressful event, is to do a little bit of assessment work with the people involved and determine what's their level of psychological functioning. Did they get knocked off balance a little bit, or did they get knocked down?
Right.
when it comes
Right.
to their psychological and emotional reaction to the incident itself. And it's pretty normal for people to get knocked off balance a little bit when something significant happens, of course. And our job really is to consider whether that person has the potential to recover from this on his or her own, or whether they're going to need additional support for a period of what may be hours or days or weeks, or whether they have experienced such significant trauma and they're having such a level of dysfunction now, either occupational dysfunction or social dysfunction, that's associated with that traumatic event, that they may need, indeterminate length of ongoing support, psychotherapy, that sort of thing. So when we talk about critical incident response, of course, that's not psychotherapy, but it is a good beginning place on the continuum of care to say, here's how we're assessing this individual, and we're going to provide whatever immediate and intermediate support they may need to get them over the hump. But if they need something longer term, then we're going to refer them for the next level of care, of course.
Sure. Is it important for us to know if the critical incident is causing this distress, or if it's a combination? Is it, if it's 60% the critical incident and 40% their upbringing? I mean, is it important for us to know that at this stage, or is that something that comes in therapy later or something like that?
Well, there's a lot that we already know if we're dealing with officers who've experienced a traumatic event, a critical incident. If that's a colleague, if that's somebody that we've worked with, there are probably things about their background and history that we already know. Certainly, sometimes that does come into play. We had a situation a couple of years ago where in one of the local departments that I do some clinical consulting for, there was an officer-involved shooting very, very early on a Sunday morning. And I went to the department and I had a conversation with the officer that was involved in the shooting. And then at a later time, we scheduled a critical incident stress debriefing for the other personnel that were on the scene. There was one individual in that group that I was particularly concerned about, and I wasn't sure why. I knew of him. We had met before. I knew that he had previously worked in another agency, a larger agency nearby, and had some history in law enforcement. I wasn't sure with what I was seeing, whether it was as a result of just this particular incident, whether that was memories of previous incidents that were coming up, something going on in his personal life, what it was. So I mentioned to their in-house peer team coordinator that I was a little concerned about what I was seeing reaction-wise with this particular officer. And so the team coordinator explained to me that this officer had a child who had some serious health problems and was present. That child was presently hospitalized, and it was kind of touch and go with some things. And so there was already that stress that had nothing to do with the job.
Yeah.
But that was compounding this particular officer's reaction to the incident that he had just been involved in. So yeah, there are things like that come into play that can influence how deep the impact may be to any particular incident, and maybe influence the duration of some period of recovery that it might take to come back, and bounce back after an incident as well.
Yeah. So one area of expertise that you have is in this post-critical incident phase. What needs to happen, and both for the officer and for the department, the people who are trying to provide help and support our officers, what do they need to do? What does the post-critical incident phase look like? I mean, what are the problems that we're seeing, and why is there urgency to address this?
Well, how honest do you want me to be about what some of the problems are?
Well, historically, there's always been this police culture stereotype of, well, just suck it up and rub some dirt in it and keep going. And obviously that was flawed thinking to the degree that it actually happened. In some places, it probably still happens. But what kind of problems do we commonly see in your experience?
One of the problems is, if there's a culture in a particular agency that has, not necessarily by policy, but by practice, discouraged officers from seeking assistance. If the officers perceive that, the administration is going to look at them differently if they say that they need some help. Yeah. Perception is reality. So they will shy away from either attending a critical incident stress debriefing or shy away from contacting the employee assistance plan or contacting the chaplain or talking to the peer team. They'll shy away from that if they think that they're going to be perceived differently. So that's something that we often talk about, is that we have to address that stigma first that's associated with asking for help. Or receiving help when it's offered. And if we can just get past the stigma, then there's a lot of good work that can be done. And if there's a history in the agency of actually showing support for officers who do receive help, in other words, they have the belief that the department is not going to punish them.
Not going to shoot the wounded. Yeah.
Exactly. And we tend to do that, I think, in a lot of agencies where we frag the wounded and eat the dead. And that's something that, again, perception is reality. If they've ever seen it happen, then they're going to believe that that's what's going to happen to them. Yeah. And it doesn't even have to be what they've seen happen in their own agency. If they're familiar with how officers in other agencies have been treated, then they're going to automatically assume that their agency is going to be the same way. So it takes some time to reassure people that it's different here.
How is post-critical incident response different for a small agency versus a large one? Small agencies don't have the resources that big ones have. So what can they do if you're a small agency?
Yeah, Jared, I love that question. And one of the things that we do here locally, because I'm in the Detroit area, and obviously there are some larger departments, Detroit included, and there's some other larger suburban departments, but we have a lot of suburbs that have agency sizes of anywhere from 30 to 50 or 60 sworn that may not have the resources to be able to put together their own peer support team, their own critical incident stress management team. Yeah. So the team I lead here locally is called the Downriver Critical Incident Response Team. And downriver, believe it or not, is not a derogatory term. The Detroit River flows south out of the city of Detroit, and so all of the communities along that trajectory south from the city of Detroit is referred to as the downriver area. So we have a multi-jurisdictional critical incident response team, and all of the agencies in that geographic region know that they have access to our team. And so we provide critical incident response to multiple agencies in the downriver area. And we've extended beyond that as well into the county just to the south, and then counties both west and east and northeast out of Detroit as well. Right. When our people are available and maybe teams from those other areas are not, or they need, someone from our team to supplement their team. So that's a good way for smaller agencies to handle post-critical incident response, is to find out, is there a a team in the area that will
collaborate,
respond, to my
work
agency
together.
And what a lot of the agencies do in this area is they will have maybe 2 or 3 of their personnel trained who then join that multi-jurisdictional team.
Yeah.
So they feel like they're making a contribution. They can not only get the help that they need for their personnel should it become necessary, but they can also cooperate and collaborate with the team in providing support to other agencies when that becomes necessary as well. I mean, they all have, in the Downriver region, we all have mutual aid agreements with all of the other agencies when it comes to everything else, whether that's the drug task force or the special response team, the SWAT team, or things like that. So why not?
Do you have a preference with like peer support? Do you have a preference with it being law enforcement only, or would you go across to other first responders like firefighters?
Well, our team is made up, because we're a multi-agency team, our team is made up of either current or former police officers, firefighters,
okay, so
paramedics and EMTs, dispatchers, corrections officers. We have hospital emergency personnel, medical personnel as well as part of our team.
Is that always good? Is that preferred?
Well, it's what it does for us is that it allows us to put a response together that is made up of peers for the situation that we are responding to.
Okay.
What often happens in smaller communities, especially, you might have 2 police officers, 2 firefighters, an ambulance crew, and a dispatcher that were all involved in the same critical incident. Give you an example. We had one of the local agencies had a drowning of a toddler. Mom wasn't home. Dad works midnights. He fell asleep on the couch while mom was gone somewhere. Toddler somehow made his way out of the house and up the pool ladder and ended up drowning in the pool. So now we've got, I think, 3 police officers altogether, the 2 patrol officers and the patrol sergeant, and then 2 firefighters, 2 paramedics from the ambulance crew that responded, and the dispatcher that was handling that call.
Yeah.
So when we were asked to put together a critical incident stress debriefing, our suggestion was, well, since they were all on the scene together, all worked the same incident together, let's have them all come for a critical incident stress debriefing, and we will bring a team that is representative of all of those disciplines, so that each of those disciplines feels as though they have someone as a peer in that room that they can identify with. Yes. Right. Yeah. I'm all for agencies that can put their own internal peer support team together, doing that, of course. And we do have agencies in our area that are large enough to do that. So police departments have their own peer team made up of just their police officers, and fire departments the same thing. The other thing that I think is really important to understand for agencies that even have their own internal peer support team is that if you have an incident that involves the entire agency, a line of duty death, for example, don't use your own internal team, because they're hurting too. They're part of the group that needs to be cared for. And so it's still important to know who else in our team or in our area, who else
can come in and help from outside,
that can respond from the outside coming in, who can act as peers because they do the same job and are probably familiar with our agency and vice versa, but let's bring in this outside team that can provide the care that we need. And I would say that that's important for chaplains as well.
Sure.
That you might feel compelled to provide the care for members of your own agency on the incidents that involve just, a limited number of people. But for an agency-wide event, because of the relationship that chaplains develop with their personnel over the course of time, you're probably hurting as badly as the sworn officers in the agency, and you need somebody to come in and provide support for you as well. So those are some important post-incident considerations also.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in interagency peer support, because when I first got started in chaplaincy, I had a group of firefighters tell me, because I was encouraging them, hey, you've got peer support in this fire department, you need to take advantage of that. And they looked at me and said, why in the world would we go to our own peer support? The people on peer support are all people who are ambitious and want to be involved and want to get promoted. They're going to be our supervisors someday. And so they had convinced themselves that they just could not go to their own peer support because they'd be working, that'd be a battalion chief someday. And they didn't want to risk it. And that has stuck with me for years, that there was that kind of fear. And so I'm like, anytime we can get agencies to help each other in that way, I feel like good. That removes that. And it's also what I like about chaplains. I'm not involved in their promotions or discipline or anything else. So they can talk to me, and I've got 1 foot inside and 1 foot outside, and they're a little safer, at least in that regard. And I can help in that way. Yeah.
Well, in all of our chaplains, and I recommend this for any agency that has a chaplain program, all of our chaplains are also trained in critical incident stress management. They've all had to take the core courses from the International Critical Incident Stress Foundation, and many of them have taken additional courses beyond just the required core courses, because they want to expand their knowledge base, to the extent that they can, so that you get a broader understanding, even as a chaplain, of how do we incorporate the principles of pastoral intervention with the principles of crisis intervention, psychological first aid. I talk about psycho-spiritual crisis. The spiritual aspect of crisis intervention is probably most essential, because in any person who has experienced a critical incident, a traumatic event, one of the things that they are often doing in the aftermath of that is searching for meaning, searching for a way to explain. This is why we ask the why questions.
Yes.
After something bad happens, right?
Yeah.
We want to know why. Well, that's not an objective question. That's a question that is subjective, and people find meaning in different ways. That's a spiritual thing.
Yes.
So it's important for chaplains to be trained in crisis intervention, as well as what they can do from a spiritual perspective to help those people navigate those stormy waters of the why in the aftermath of a critical incident as well. For post-critical incident response, the better the pre-incident education is,
yes.
The more likely it is that the post-incident response is going to be helpful.
Yes, I was just talking to a chaplain in Indiana, Jeff Wolf, who was saying that one missing piece in our officer wellness programming is teaching them at the academy level that we can and will take care of them. Now, we have to follow through with that, but it's not communicated. And so sometimes when they're introduced to, okay, what happens when things get bad, they're introduced to maybe an anecdotal example of something, of again, shooting the wounded or whatever. And so they think, well, that's what'll happen. And we need to, head that off at the pass and tell them right from the start, like from day one, that we're interested in your wellness and we want you to communicate. We're not going to punish you for asking for help. And so,
and of course, part of the problem with pre-incident education is in the academies, the typical response is we don't have time to fit that in, because we have to fit in the required training. And we don't want to extend the academy any further just to add X number of hours of training in critical incident stress and post-crisis response and those kinds of things. And I can understand that to a certain degree, unless you realize that the hundreds of hours that they spend in firearms training in an academy for something that 95% of officers will never do.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Why, if you want to say, well, our academy is going to be 600 hours, well, take 8 hours of the firearms away and put in 8 hours of having some expert training on critical incident stress.
Yeah, good luck. That suggestion's not going to make you any friends. Yeah.
No.
Because whatever you take away from, whether firearms or anything else, somebody will say, oh, no, that's critical. It's so important. Well, all of these things are important. I like what you said about the stress being something that, that's more likely for them to encounter life-altering stress and stress management problems than they are an officer-involved shooting, just percentage-wise.
I mean, just to give you an example of a couple of the incidents that my agency has had in recent weeks, and I happen to be on scene for two very serious incidents within just a few days of each other. One was a suicide by shotgun in one of our city parks, and it happened, right around midnight one night, and an individual, stood out next to his car, leaned down over the shotgun, put the butt of the shotgun on the ground, put the shotgun under his chin, and used his thumb to pull the trigger. And as you can imagine, there was quite a mess left.
Yeah.
With that, and I got called to that scene and spent some time with the officers while we were waiting for the medical examiner to come with transport, and also, did death notification to family members and those kinds of things. And then just a few days later, a young man walking on a set of railroad tracks with earbuds in and music blasting, and probably thought the train was on the other track.
Right.
And turned around just in time to see the train smack him, and he got rolled underneath the train for about a quarter mile and ended up in a number of different places along the track.
Yeah.
And I got called to that scene, and it was exactly the same crew of officers that had been on the suicide in the park just a few days earlier. So they will suffer more things like that over the course of a career than the risk of ever being involved in a shooting. Not that we haven't, because in the last 3 years we've had and ours is a relatively small agency, but we've had 2 officer involved shootings. And,
and they do happen, and firearm proficiency is a point of professional pride for an officer too. And so there's lots of importance there. It's not that we're against that at all. It's just that this is also a very important subject, and it needs more attention.
Well, and we've had officers who barely passed firearms in the academy, and then now they come to the agency and they have to learn to shoot the agency issued firearm.
Right.
And don't qualify the first couple of times they try that. So
exactly.
Teach them at the agency level what you need them to know, and add one more period of qualification in the agency that I am a reserve officer at. We qualify 4 times a year.
Yeah.
So there's plenty of opportunity to stay proficient with your firearms, but there may not be as much of an opportunity to stay proficient in caring for yourself and building resilience and, caring for your personal wellness in a lot of other ways. So that kind of education and training is of extreme importance prior to an incident ever happening.
Yeah.
One of the other things that we do with our Call for Backup organization is provide what we call a post-critical incident seminar. And, that's an idea that was originally developed by the FBI, and it was designed to actually happen over a period of days. We have been doing an abbreviated version of that. What we do is we bring in a group of officers. Our nonprofit covers the cost, bring them in, feed them dinner on a Friday night. We have a keynote speaker that will talk about his or her own critical incident and give a story of recovery. In other words, we want to start the seminar out with a story of hope. Beauty from ashes versus
despair.
I'm still in this state of deep despair.
Yeah.
So that's how we do Friday night, and then we put couples up that come because we open it up to partners at home as well. So we put couples up in a hotel for the night, and then all day on Saturday, we're having alternating psychoeducational sessions followed by periods of group discussion. And we have licensed clinicians guiding those discussions. And we give people opportunities to have a one-on-one conversation if they choose with a clinician while they're on site, and feed them lunch and, send them home at the end of the day with some hope that, as bad as this was and as bad as it has been in this period of recovery, there is hope that it will get better. Right.
Yeah.
And so that's I think one of the things that we need to do. And that's one of the goals of crisis intervention, critical incident response altogether, is to foster hope in people that the future can be better than the past or the present, irrespective of what we've been through, that there is hope that it can be better. And that's what people need. I mean, one of my favorite authors is John Maxwell. And one of the things that he has said is that where there's no faith in the future, there's no power in the present. So, we've got to give people hope.
Yeah.
And, part of what we do in critical incident response is not only address where people are, but help them sort of, shine a light toward the darkness and see that, it's not an endless abyss, that there's something positive that can be there on the other side. They just have to go in the right direction.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's fantastic. David, thank you so much. I appreciate this. I appreciate the work you're doing, and I appreciate you talking to me about it.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. Anytime.
I'm so appreciative of David coming on the show. He's an excellent communicator, and his personal and professional experiences are unparalleled. It's fantastic to have access to an expert who can just give you helpful and practical pearls of wisdom, one right after another. I could have let him go on for another hour. One of the points that I especially appreciated was that one of the key elements of post-critical incident care is done prior to the incident. You must convince that officer beforehand that the department is not going to shoot the wounded. And then the leadership of the department needs to keep that promise for everyone's sake. On the next episode of Hey Chaplain.
It's extremely hard to describe what it feels like. I've taken some time to just sit with the names of the fallen officers. And as you would expect, it's heavy.
Yeah.
But there's so much more to it. There is hope for the families and the coworkers, keeping those memories alive every single day. There is the joy of a good memory and a story told.
The views expressed here are the personal views of the host and our guest and do not necessarily represent the views of any law enforcement agency or its components. If you like this episode, please share it with a cop or someone who loves a cop. Thank you for listening to Hey Chaplain, and as always, pray for peace in our city. Let me clarify too. Do you want me to call you Dave, David, Dr. Edwards? You know what? How would you like me to address you?
Yeah, David is fine for public consumption.
David, okay.
Yep.
Okay. And you're welcome to call me Jared or Chaplain. I mean, that's the origin of the name of the podcast is because they didn't know my name, and so officers just go, "Hey, Chaplain," and so that is them not knowing exactly how to address me, and all
of the guys in our agency with military experience, call me Chap.
Oh, yes. Yes, that's very common. Yes.
They don't even call me by name anyway. So, they all know my name, obviously.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah. No, that's fantastic.
So I answer to a number of different things.
Yes. Well, I joke at church. People are like, oh, what do we call you, pastor or reverend or whatever? I'm like, I respond to, hey, you.
Yeah. Well, and people always, want to, is it, do I call you doctor? Do I call you reverend? Pastor? Whatever. And my typical response has become, well, Jesus just went by Jesus.
Yes.
So so just call me by my name. That's perfectly fine.
Yeah. We're of the same mind there. Absolutely.